Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much great information coming out of here from all of you, and to my colleague for bringing up a conversation that I wish we could do a whole other committee on when we talk about investing in preventing mental health. If we're going to be honest about preventing mental health, where are we putting that money? Where are we putting that education piece into it? I'm going to go back to you, Owen, Mr. Charters. I want to delve a little bit deeper if we can, because we have a bit more time to do this. When we talk about the burden, the adult problems that are being transferred to the children, and they're carrying this over, and when we look at this study in particular, we're looking at factors contributing to mental health issues experienced by young women and girls, including but not limited to eating disorders, addiction, depression, anxiety, and suicide. I hear from kids, and they'll say, well, I didn't want to tell my parents I wanted to take hockey, or I didn't tell my parents I wanted to do dance because I know they don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. What do you think about that as a major factor? Where would that fall in what you're seeing in the Boys and Girls Club?
As a major factor in terms of the mental health challenge they have from
just the anxiety of worrying about adult problems, money at home, financial stress.
Yeah, that's where it fits. I don't know, but it's a big factor, and where the reason I don't know is because again we haven't asked that question and specifically of where do you think about that, but too often kids who come from underprivileged homes or homes where there is a single parent take on a burden that is like an adult at a very young age, and they worry about those adult issues. And they may not always let their parents know, because part of being a responsible member of that family is not to let that burden fester on the other members of the family. So we see that as part of single-parent families especially, or families where the parents are dysfunctional. And of course that comes into clubs. And what our clubs do is to try to take on those opportunities for those kids where the family can't provide it. We often hear, in fact, in London at the club at an event I was at, where a family said the club was the missing father in their family, and it provided that balance that those kids needed and couldn't otherwise access. But I think we don't understand how significant that is. And if there's a movie at TIFF, came out I think a year ago, Scarborough. It's well worth watching. It tells the real life story. It's not the real life stories, it's a dramatized version, but it's the real stories of what our clubs see of kids who take on those burdens of their parents, who are working through real challenges in their life, from putting food on the table to securing employment. And when you talked about regulating emotion, the challenge of dealing with a parent who cannot regulate their emotion, and how the kid becomes the sort of antidote to that, or takes on those challenges. And I think those are pretty scary elements that live on into adulthood, one way or the other.
And I think, I just would add to that, when you say poverty, I think what used to be low income now is become the middle class. Like it's not even just lower income families anymore. This has become an everyday Canadian problem. I have people write to me often. They're like, Michelle, I make $100,000. That's a lot of money, and I still can't make it. It used to be paycheck to paycheck. Now it's 10 days before paycheck, and that is trickling down to our kids. And it's this anxiety, this worry, this fear, this burden, and then the long-term impacts of what's going to happen from COVID, because the parents didn't have the tools in their tool belt to regulate their emotions. The stress comes on to them, and bing, bang, boom, you've got a domino effect that we're going to be seeing the impacts of this for, in my opinion, quite frankly, decades. When we look at abandonment as well, coping mechanisms or maladaptive coping mechanisms for parents who just can't manage that stress. Social media, we talk about kids being exposed to social media, but what about the parents who are on their phones trying to manage and self-regulate because they can't? That's what we would call a maladaptive coping mechanism. I'm curious what I've seen, and I would love your feedback, and maybe I'll throw it over to you, Michelle, or Crystal, Jill, KJ. When I see what my kids do, I think of only myself too. When you watch the news over and over and over again, and how it starts to impact your mental state because it's negative, And what do you think the impact of the media is on children?
Definitely negative. I think that social media, and Owen, you said this earlier, you know, the bully can now be there at 3 a.m. on your phone, and that can be for parents or children. Also algorithms, so, you know, once we start looking at certain things, our phones will now reinforce those beliefs for us over and over. So if you're looking at, you know, sad or depressing things, that's just what's going to start to feed to you all the time. So I think algorithms are a big part of the problem. I have no idea what laws look like around that or how we regulate things like that. But if the federal government does, I would love for them to pay attention to that. I was also thinking about, you know, when you were mentioning families that are, you know, now you need dual income, you both need to be working full time. That's now more time away from children. Children are isolating, so now they're spending more times on their phones to try and get that connection where those bullies are. So it really is just a continuous perpetuating problem. One of the things that I think about, which I know is getting a little away from your question of social media, but one thing that would be really beneficial is peer support for families. I see. Peer support for families is an avenue where we can actually look at equipping parents and children to understand what's happening. We talked about mental health first aid earlier, and how if you teach that to a child and they come home and say, listen, I'm depressed, that can be really traumatizing for a parent. But you teach the parents as well what that means, and you can start to build community and relationship within the homes.
Fantastic.
Talk for another 20.
I try to talk fast.
It's all good. I know about talking fast.